Um, hey guys, so I'm Jason Rogers, and a couple things I want to talk about today. Number one is my story in fencing, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But number two, I have this kind of crazy idea that we are all writers, and there's a couple of writers here with us today. And what I mean by that is that we all are writing our story as we go along. If you think about it, every little decision that we make is like the pen going across the page, writing the content of our story. And I think that there are a couple of principles that if we keep them in mind, it'll help us be better writers of our own narratives. So before we do that, let me share with you a little bit about fencing story. Because if any of you know anything about fencing, I'm going to guess that it comes from this. Who are these guys, right? This is Johnny Depp, Orlando Bloom in Pirates of the Caribbean. And it's really funny when I talk about fencing, or I tell people that I was a fencer, and they go, oh my God, like Pirates of the Caribbean, or like Star Wars. And I go, that's right, it's just like Star Wars. I go to space, and I fight with swords made of lasers. That's what I do every single day. But that's not really what fencing is about at all. It's actually funny because this totally skews the perception of fencing, the way the film portrays us. But what fencing really is something different, and these four handsome gentlemen are fencers from the 1900s. And before I even say anything about the history of fencing, I just want you to notice what's going on here. I like to call this Team Mustachio, because whatever they lacked in fencing ability, they certainly make up for in facial hair. So the actual history of modern fencing is out of Western Europe. So in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, there was the aristocrats, right? So there were the kings and queens, and then there were all the barons and dukes that held all the land. And so there was kind of this code of honor, such that if you insulted somebody, they would say, I challenge you to a duel. And so they'd go out and they'd fight these battles, essentially with swords, and you'd fight to first blood. And so what ended up happening was, in trying to draw blood, you'd actually kill your opponent. So a lot of the aristocrats ended up killing each other, and obviously the kings and queens were like, that's not cool, so they ended up outlawing it. They said, that's it, you can't duel anymore. But because they had been practicing for these duels, there was almost like a sport already. And so when duels were outlawed, essentially modern fencing was born. And so Rob talked about the tradition of the Olympic Games already. They began in 1896 with Pierre de Coubertin, and fencing is actually only one of several sports that's been included in every single modern Olympic Games since then. And it's one of our things that we're really proud of. It's one of the things that makes fencing's history so rich. But it looks very different today than it did. Obviously, our gentlemen suitors with the mustaches look different from this. And this is actually me in the 2008 Olympic Games doing a maneuver that I definitely can't do anymore because I would probably tear my pants and my hamstring all at once. But fencing is different because, as you can see, it's actually electrified. So this jacket that I'm wearing is made out of metallic thread, and there's a little green light right up there on my head. And if I hit the opponent, that light goes off. And the same is true of the other opponent. And we have a referee that determines, okay, did you do the right action? Were you the attacker? And did you hit? And if so, then you get the point. So how did I get involved in this crazy sport we call fencing? I like to think I was an Olympian from birth. Because I don't know if you know, but I think the cheetah Speedo says speed and agility and whatnot. The funny thing is I was actually not a very good athlete when I was growing up. I played lots of sports. I played basketball, I played soccer, I played tennis, and I was miserable at all of them. So I got really lucky. I got really lucky in finding fencing because it clicked in a way that I never clicked with any of these other sports. And so now going back to this idea of being a writer of your own story, I really believe that there are a couple of things that can help you kind of find your way, write your content in the way that you ultimately want it. And so this first idea is you've got to identify the right characters in the story. And I'm sure our writers can attest, a story is its characters. And so the first thing that I got really lucky with was I found this crazy guy. This is Daniel Costin. This was my first coach who I met when I was 11 years old, when I stumbled into fencing, literally by happenstance, through a good friend of mine in elementary school. And at the very least, I can say he is the most jovial, the most magnetic, and the most fun person to be around. And so there was something about being around his presence that made me want to come to practice. It made me want to work hard to learn all the skills that I need to learn to actually be a good fencer. And so that's when I started to find my rhythm as an athlete. Number one, it was through this person. The other thing that I want to talk about is there's another thing that you want to think about, and that is if you're writing your story, right, you're the protagonist, you're the central character. And there's something really powerful in knowing that, number one, your story is going to end happily, and number two, you, the protagonist, are going to prevail in the end. So when I was 11 years old, and I was around Daniel Costin, and I was kind of trying to find my way as an athlete, I kind of realized this probably more in retrospect when I was maybe 16 or 17 years old, but the reason why I never figured it out in any of those other sports was I had this completely wrong perspective in the way that I approached it. And I used to play Little League, as I said, and I kind of got banished to the outfield because no one would let me be around the ball. No one wanted me anywhere near it because I would invariably drop it. And I kind of figured out why that was, because I would stand out in the outfield and they would hit the ball and I'd go, please God, don't come to me, please don't come to me, please don't come to me. So what do you think happens when you're thinking that? You drop the ball, right? And there's this really funny thing with the mind, it's called the self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is when you focus on bad things happening, bad things tend to be more likely to happen. And when you focus on good things happening, good things tend to be more likely to happen. And so there was this very strange perceptual shift that happened when I started fencing and when I was around Daniel Costin. I started to believe more in myself, and I started to approach challenges differently. And I think that's been one thing that really has kind of pushed me forward and allowed me to confront challenges differently. So this picture is actually from the first tournament that I ever won. I think there was about 3 people involved in the tournament, but it was a victory nonetheless. And it sort of signifies a different way of approaching competition, challenge, and obstacles. Because again, your focus needs to be on what you want to do, not what you don't want to do. Another thing, and this is, in a way, almost the most important thing, is if you're a writer, you've already written a lot of chapters, right? Many of you are already 18 years old, 17 years old, and you have a long history behind you. And a lot of stuff has happened in your life, and you have a lot of memories about things that you've done and haven't done. And I think one of the most important things that we can understand is that our memories, but more particularly the emotions that we have about those memories, influence the way that we approach challenges in the future. And so I had this really crazy thing happen to me, and we're fast-forwarding through a lot of my career, but I qualified for the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens when I was about 21 years old. And I was so excited, I was so nervous. Walking through the opening ceremonies and doing that whole kind of thing was just the most unbelievable thing I'd ever had. I had my whole family there. I had all these friends with me. And so I got to fence in 2 competitions. Number one was the individual competition, which was literally the day after opening ceremonies. And the second was about 5 days later, and it was the team event. So I get out there, I'm super excited. I'm fencing this veteran guy named Luigi Tarantino. And I'm thinking, I'm going to beat this guy. I'm going to win a medal. I'm going to do all this stuff. And I get out there, and one point happens, and the next point happens, and slowly the rug gets pulled out from under me. He scores point after point after point after point, and I lost 15-3. It was an obliteration, and it was embarrassing. It was really, really hard for me because all my family was there. People were watching on TV, and I walked away from it thinking, like, what just happened? What is this all about? Why did I put all this energy into this? But I managed to pull myself together.
And then in the team event, we had this really crazy experience happen to us as well. This is actually a picture from the team event. But we fenced in 3 matches. And in the first match, we fenced against Hungary. And we won an incredibly close match against them. It came down to 1 point. And so then we were in the medal round, and we were actually fencing to win a medal at that point.
We were fencing against France. And it was this crazy match. It was so intense. It was so emotionally draining. And I got all the way to the end of the match, and we were tied at 44-44, with the winner scoring the next point and medaling. And we get there, and we're all, this is us, like, all in complete, like, paralysis. We're just so nervous about this moment. And we lost the touch. But then we were like, all right, it's fine. We're going to go on. We're going to fence one more match. We have one more opportunity to medal. So we go and fence Russia, and it's the same match. It goes all the way to the end, 44-44. And we lose the touch, and we finish 4th place, just out of medal contention. And so I left Athens with this really strange, bitter taste in my mouth. And for the next year, it sort of polluted the way that I thought about my Olympic experience and my entire career as an athlete. And the funny thing was that it wasn't until about a year later when I applied for a scholarship and I had to write this essay, and I chose to write about this experience, that I realized the power of the ability to go back and kind of change the way you think about stuff, to change your memories almost. Because I had to write this essay, draft after draft after draft, and I realized slowly, I started to change the way that I was thinking about this and change the way that it influenced me and the way that I felt. So rather than thinking that I had failed, I thought, hey, this is going to make me stronger. This is going to change the way that I train. It's going to change my tenacity going up to the next games. And so the next 3 years were really different, qualitatively different, because of the way that I approached training and because of the way that I changed this memory in my mind. So I was actually really lucky in the sense that it wasn't easy. So I go to qualify for the 2008 Olympic Games, and I had an incredibly difficult season, but I was fueled by this belief that, look, what had happened in Athens was going to make things better, was going to change the way that I approached. And so I qualified by the very skin of my teeth. At the very last competition, I actually had to beat somebody face to face, man to man, to make the Olympic team. And so we get to Beijing, and I'm nervous and excited, and all those same emotions that I had when I was 21 years old. I was a little bit older, a little bit wiser. But I knew one thing, and that I was going to approach this completely differently. And so in the team event, we had this really strange thing happen. And it was that it was almost like this cosmic mirror experience. We fenced the exact same teams, and it laid out almost the exact same way. So in the first round, we fenced Hungary, who we had fenced in Athens. And the match is really intense. It goes all the way up to 44-44, and it was this kind of moment. But this time we won, and that was exhilarating and crazy. And then so we go and we fence Russia, and this is to make the gold medal round. So this is for all the marbles. This is for a medal. And the same thing happens. We go all the way up to 44-44, and you can cut the tension with a knife. But this time we won, and we medal. We went on to lose to France, unfortunately, but that was it. This goal had been accomplished. We'd won a medal. And I won't say that it was because of the way that I changed my mentality, but collectively as a team, we all were on the same page. We all had that positive perspective. We all knew that we could do it. And so for me, that's a really strong lesson. You know, number one, me being the writer of my story, that makes me feel a real sense of ownership with each decision that I make, that I'm writing the story the way I want to write it. It's not being written for me. And again, I really think it's, number one, about bringing the right people into your life, bringing the mentors into your life that teach you the great things that make you better, bringing the great coaches into your life. You know, number two, it's about having this positive perspective, because no matter what, that's going to make your success so much more likely in anything that you want to do. And then number three, it's about being proactive about your memories, about thinking about how you feel about stuff. And with all those skills together, I guarantee you we will all write so much more compelling chapters, so much more compelling stories and narratives for our lives. Thanks, guys.